Hello, Dragon Slayers. We are joined again today with my wise, knowledgeable cousin, Michael Dallen. Michael is the author of a wonderful book called The Rainbow Covenant. And in addition, we're brought to you by our book, Dragon Slaying, which recently is now available on Audible, apparently. Uh, for those of you who'd like to listen to it, I've morphed into a British voice chosen by my editor coincident to my current hoarse state. So I thought that might add an elegant dash to my recording. I tried to approximate as much as I could the voice of Michael Caine or someone such as that, but unfortunately, there are restrictions on that sort of thing. So this is just a more plebeian but very pleasant British voice. Michael, I wanted to talk to you today about something that has always been of interest to me, and that is we learn about the Jews in the Old Testament, of which you are a scholar, but many of us know very little of the history of the Jews after the Roman Empire and after the Diaspora. And I wonder if you can inform us as to the dynamics of the Diaspora, and in particular, how did a largely Sephardic Jewish population morph into what has now become the dominant Jewish population in the world, the Ashkenazi Jews?
Okay, well, there in Israel, most of the Jews are from the Sephardic background, and Israel is pretty representative. We don't know is an answer. The Jews spread out even in the times of the First Temple, in the times of the what we call the minor prophets and the great prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah. The Jews had already spread as far as the Atlantic Ocean. Um, you have the great Greek geographer Strabo. Is that the name? Strabo, saying that you would never find a town in the Mediterranean basin where the Jews had not come and settled and made themselves the masters. Because of course the Jews are these people of middle class values dealing with these pagans, these Gentile pagans who did not have middle class values, who didn't put a high value on literacy or on sobriety, people who had believed that the best way to come to the ultimate, to God, to the infinite, was by getting stoned, as opposed to the Jews who we've always believed that the best way to reach God is sober. So the Jews succeeded all through the world, and they spread out, and they went literally. You have Job, for instance. I'm sorry, Jonah, in the book of Jonah, and this is in First Temple times, before the destruction of the temple, who takes ship to Tarsus, which is an Atlantic coast town in Spain, to the original Sepharad, which is the Hebrew word for Spain. At one point, we have some knowledge, and it's reflected in the classic book, The Kuzari, by Yehuda Halevi, about the conversion of the king of the Khazars in between the Black and the Caspian Seas, who converted to Judaism, along with many of his people. And there's a historical record. There's some indication that this actually happened.
What persuaded the king to convert?
Well, he interviewed the Muslims, and he interviewed the Christians, and who hated each other. The only thing that they could agree on was that they both got their religion from the Jews, and um, and they hated each other more than they hated the Jews, which was a temporary foible. But it made him interested in Judaism, and he appeared to have decided that Judaism was true. that it,
Is it possible that he just needed a good accountant?
good lawyer, good doctor, good psychiatrist. Well, he got them because the Jews found this to be in an era of horrible persecution. The Jews flocked to. This is in the time. This was a little after Justinian and the never to be adequately damned Byzantine Empire that was hounding the Jews, and a militant Islam was spreading, and the Jews found a respite in this area. All these itinerant Torah teachers um, flocked to this area. It's near part of the area was what became Soviet Georgia or Georgia, uh, between the Black and the Caspian Seas. And you had a Turkic people who seemed to be blondish or red haired, who spoke a Turkic language. And a whole bunch of them became Jewish. And Judaism almost disappeared in Europe around the year 1000. I think we were down to something like 60 Ashkenazic, as you'd call them, families. Um, the persecution had been so terrible that in Western Europe they were almost gone, and they went east.
Time out. What were the forces behind the persecution in the first millennium?
Christian fervency and a desire to train these Christ killers and make them repent and make them come to what they regarded as the fulfillment of Judaism, the new
So,
religion,
so
the religion of love.
the word was that the Jews were responsible for the death of Christ.
Well, that was an ongoing phenomenon, yeah. Uh, well, and they also read these books. The Old Testament is full of condemnation of the Jews for not being, adequate representatives of the King of the universe, and they without contextualizing that, of course, they decided, well, these Jews are damned, and they
You,
better
you,
turn around.
you mean the New Testament?
No, no, the Old Testament.
Old Testament as well.
Yeah, it's pretty rough on the Jews. It's we very rarely live up to our marching orders. How faithful are we in any generation? It's just that there always is a loyal core, and for all our, the Jews are famous for straying, and we're promised. That we will be punished. We will be exiled from our land. We were for failure to comply with the marching orders with the Torah. So, and they saw that Jerusalem had been destroyed not once but twice, and the Jews were exiled. So we were in an era of punishment, and they thought that the Jews have it coming, and they did what they could with might and main to bring the lesson home. So Jewish life became well nigh nearly impossible. But there were openings, and that you had things like the Jews were forbidden from owning land and from most means of making a living. But somebody had to be in Europe to lend people money, particularly the nobles and royalty needed to borrow, and the Jews were allowed to do that, and so they found a niche, but it was tough going. But meanwhile, you had a thriving. You did have the Jews more or less thriving in the Muslim and Arab world,
Pause for a
and
moment.
they
If you could get back to the Old Testament condemning Jews, were you referring to the various prophets that condemn the ways of the Jews that were straying away from their faith?
Yeah, and doing, well, not just straying away from the faith, but doing cruel things. I mean, you got Jeremiah, for instance. We all know about Jeremiah's, these big wound up curses applied to the Jews for not doing what is just and righteous and kind, um, and for for pretending to worship the God of compassion and kindness, but acting as mean as oppressors. So there are a lot of harsh words for the community of Israel, um,
So how much of that
from the prophet.
how much of that message was a legacy that was carried to the medieval rabbis? Did the medieval rabbis have this role of shepherding the flock and getting them to adhere to religious doctrine?
Well, rabbis, the descendants of the priests, the Kohanim, the descendants of the Levites also felt a special obligation. Um, and you have the basic structure of the economic structure of Jewish society, where you have an awful lot of people invested in the accoutrements of Judaism, and things like making tefillin and providing Shabbos candles and providing kosher food and providing fringes and the rest of those things that Jews need to be Jews. So you had a lot of people with a vested interest, an economic interest in keeping things going. So that was part of the dynamic.
So when we look at the medieval ghetto, we're looking at a symbiotic community.
Well, that was later. The ghetto first started in, as you know, it started in Venice, and I think around 1100. But we had to get through year 1000, and it was very, very dicey, you know. Um, but the Jews either went east in Europe. They either went east to the northeast from western Spain and France to Germany and farther afield, and and a lot came out of Byzantium and, the Byzantine world, and a lot came out of the Sephardic world. And they came to the land of Khazaria. So I have, that our family has an odd preponderance of blue eyed blondes. Um, and it looks, and I've seen a picture of some of my early forebears, great grandfather, and they look kind of, some are dark, some are light, but they have like Turkic features, not really Semitic features, and it looks like something happened among Khazaria until Genghis Khan came, and everybody got driven to the west. And at that time, you had the development in places like Poland of Yiddish, well, Germany. I mean, for sure, the Jews were in the Frankish and Germanic lands, and Yiddish came from there. So it was a tough slog, just staying alive as Jews in an extremely hostile world where everyone knew that the Jews were, to some level, cursed because we were bereft of our land. The big cry until the creation of Israel for all the Jews was, why don't you go back to your own country, to the land of Israel? And, we'd been exiled from it and weren't allowed to go. But that underlined our bad status as we were still people under a curse.
Well, ultimately, is in terms of our grandparents, great grandparents, we found some refuge in northeastern Europe, in that North Pale, that is Lithuania, Poland, Russia, and so on.
Well, the leaders of those countries knew that they needed a middle class in order to bring prosperity to their lands and to their peoples. They knew they needed a middle class, somebody to come and be the factors in the farms and the mines, the ranches and the cities, somebody to be timekeepers, to do the accounting, and, and a lot of the craft work. The Jews were, I mean, we were famous craftsmen, hand workers, made the clothes. So good King Wenceslas actually invited the Jews, please come, and there was some respite. They guaranteed protection of the laws, which was more than we'd gotten elsewhere. And the Jews came in response, kind of like Pharaoh inviting, Joseph and his brothers and their families to settle in Egypt. The call came out to the Jews: "You are welcome here. Please come." And the Jews did, and they were able to find niches, which really worked out well when Poland, for instance, and the Baltic countries, and the lands of the Teutonic Knights, and the Slavic tribes needed a middle class. But with modernity, they developed their own middle class. They developed their own cadres of people who could read, people who weren't stoned all the time, drunk, um, and people with much more moderate habits and literate habits. So later, and I'll give you an example. One of my great heroes, Vladimir Zeev Jabotinsky, who grew up in Odessa, turn of the last century, was explaining to the Jews, it is time to go, people. They have developed their own middle class. You are now competing with their middle class, and they hate you because they feel that they're in competition with you for jobs. And this happened, after the Civil War with the Industrial Revolution. And indeed, it was time for the Jews to go. Uh, and finally, there were some inklings that the land of Israel was available, land without people for people without a land, and people began going. And and may I put in a plug for the Christian Zionists, which we had some. We had these, like the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, this Pastor Charles Taze Russell, was this vociferous Zionist, kind of like John Hagee today, who understood the Bible, understood that God blesses those who bless the Jews, and that those who attack the Jews will be ruined themselves. You had these people who were pulling full force and trying to encourage the Jews, go to the land now. It is time to go to the land, and and even some of our relatives took up the call before the turn of the last century and began going to this malarial pit of a lousy land that had been raped by these horrible, savage Gentiles over over scores of generations. The Turks and before the Byzantines and the Mamluks and people like that who didn't give a damn about it. Um, and it was mostly malarial and, and devastated. But they began going back and dying in vast numbers from malaria and things like that. But they did begin building it back up after our Civil War.
As a historian looking at the shelf life of our nomadic enterprises, it seems like at best it's good for 6 to 8 generations, and then we wear out our welcome wherever we go.
Well, the idea is that we should be in our land, in the land of Israel. Um, did I mention to you? I like estate sales, and I was at this estate sale where the people in this big mansion had collected the sermons of Father Coughlin. May his name be erased. This horrible, a famous Catholic radio priest, they called him.
I think we've talked
Um,
about him about 2 episodes ago. Go ahead.
well, he was something. Charles Coughlin was a ferocious Jew baiter in the time of Henry Ford and his Jew baiting, and in the time of the Nazis. And um, Franklin Roosevelt finally had to have the Catholics take him off the air because he was hurting the World War II war effort with his fulminations against the Jews and everything good, and against Roosevelt himself. Of course, he hated Roosevelt. Um, but I was looking through his sermons, and he had a sermon there that I found that I just cherish because in it he's quoting the ancient Jew baiter Cicero, who was famous rhetorician and lawyer who would represent these people who accused the Jews of cannibalism and every other sin and flaw and crime against mankind. And he was mocking the Jewish religion
By the way,
because
reputed by some to be one of the more eloquent of the Romans.
absolutely eloquent he was. You can't, generations, hundreds of generations, I think, of Latin students have studied the rhetoric of Cicero, you know. And he was mocking the religion. He was saying the God of the Jews must be only a very puny, lousy, dinky God if all he could provide for his people was this dinky, puny little land called, the Holy Land, the land of Israel, Judea, uh, which is really something because when you look at the way we have, that included, the occupied territories, the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, Gaza, including all southern Gaza, southern Lebanon, parts of Syria, and all that. And he regarded it as just this dinky little province, this forgotten, fly speck of a land. And that's all the God of the Jews, the creator of the universe, could give to his people? Ha!
It's a bit ironic for anybody who's ever seen a Little Flower Church, which is one of the most plebeian structures you can see on Woodward Avenue.
Not plebeian, no, flamboyant. No, it is. I mean, I don't want to admire that goddamn church, pardon me, but it's something. They poured wealth into it.
Well, I guess when was the most recent?
You're thinking of something else.
No, when was it most recently constructed? I should.
The city of Royal Oak was constructed
No, I'm talking about.
after the Shrine of the Little Flower. It had to be. Father Coughlin brought these people from all over America, and particularly he drew them out of Detroit to assemble the most magnificent. They call it a basilica. This church that he built there at Woodward. It's just right up the road at 12 Mile.
I guess my opinion of the architecture may have been colored by impressions of.
Yes, yeah, and what our elders said about it, right?
Right.
Miserable dump, but it's really fancy.
Okay.
They had to build the Royal Oak Post Office in Roosevelt in New Deal FDR times just to accommodate the mail coming to Father Coughlin, with 50 cents or 25 cents or maybe $1 in the mail. They needed a post office just for him, the rotten bastard. So my Uncle Howard was going on, who was born in 1930, and he was going on as a little boy. He could hear these radio broadcasts where but good old Father Coughlin is storming against the Jews. The Jews, the scourge of mankind, since they killed our Christ, and which is the same kind of stuff that drove the Jews almost into extinction in early Europe. But the, at that time, it's so ironic that he would lead me to Cicero and this quote about the dinky little Holy Land, that what a small land it is, but look how fraught the ownership of it is. I
So,
mean,
is there, beyond people returning to Israel, do you see seeds of a restoration of Jewish identity in Western Europe, in the US, in Russia, in Asia? Are there growing forces that appreciate the message of the Old Testament?
yeah, and there's also an unfortunate, I'd say, turn to the irrational, to the mystic kinds of Judaism. Uh, I mean, that are consciously irrational, um, and to magical healing and things like that. And that's the bathwater that comes along with the baby. Um, but you definitely do. 1967 changed everything. That was the Six-Day War, and when the Russians began turning around. And I'll tell you, part of my background is uh, meeting this Russian mathematician who had been overwhelmed by the events of 1967 when this extremely dinky, tiny Israel beat the hell out of the assembled Arab armies that came, deliberately to drive the Jews into the sea. I mean, they planned genocide. They wanted not just to hurt or defeat Israel, but to annihilate Israel, which has been the plan. Um, and this guy was this brilliant mathematician. He was at Harvard at the time. Harvard had grabbed him. They wanted him. Um, and and he had begun studying Judaism, and he led me into it, among others. And you have this phenomenon where others lead you in. And I remember his argument because he was pointing out it was a section of Exodus where you have really the laws of if you injure somebody, you must um, you must provide damages. You must work to make him whole. And I was a young lawyer, and damages were of intense interest to me at the time because that's how we make our money. And he was talking about it, and there you have from more than 3,000 years ago the instruction that if you injure somebody, you have to pay the doctor's bill. And it it was a revelation. I mean, as modern as tomorrow, as eternal as the rainbow, you got to pay the doctor's bill, and that is just part of damages.
A bit ironic that your profession feeds mine, right?
It's he recognized the joy in this. Well, it was a gathering for lawyers and doctors. You know,
Uh,
the rabbi who put it on had a special outreach to. I just had lunch with him yesterday. This 6'8" rabbi with Marfan's and you know his physical issues, but he had put it on. So it was all for lawyers and doctors, and we were all there, and it resonated with all of us. But imagine this. There's nothing like that in world literature. You have Nietzsche, for instance, is famous as as an atheist, as a God is dead kind of man, and but he appreciated this this the book of righteousness. He called the Old Testament, the Tanakh, as opposed to he was saying the worst crime that literary Europe has on its conscience is trying to jam together this book of righteousness in the name of the Old Testament with this so-called New Testament, which is so rococo and minor. But yeah, we have a big renewal, and it's happening. And with the Jews in the land, you have something happening. The observances take on a lot more meaning when you are. They've reinstituted the Shemitah year, the year of letting the land lie fallow every 7 and 40, 50 years. You have a very high level of observance there and a coming around. And you have so much that is prophecies fulfilled. For instance, the prophecy, we've talked about this, the prophecy that if you don't get rid of the enemy aliens in your midst, the supposedly indigenous people or whoever is there, that they will be thorns in your eyes and pins in your sides, and I will drive you out instead of them. We've seen that. We've seen the prophecies of in Psalms of the prediction that the assembled nations will come against Israel, including the Ishmaelites, the Arabs, and other peoples, to not just to defeat the Jews, but to eradicate the Jews and to erase even the mention of Israel's name. That's some remarkable prophecy from thousands and thousands of years ago. And when you see that it's ongoing, and then when you see the value of some of the prohibitions, and we've made progress in understanding some of them. In my book, I go on about the milk and meat, for instance, and I have the advantage of looking at this Torah prohibition that the Jews shall not eat milk and meat together, or blood together. And when you look at it through the lens of the 7 universal laws, which we're really, really just beginning to understand, it's taken 3,000 years for us to get as far as we've gotten so far. There's more to be done and thought about, but we're just beginning to get a handle on some of this stuff. It takes time to figure out God's laws, but then you see that instead of looking at it just through the perspective of the Jews, you see through the perspective of the universal law, and that the King of the universe, God, really cares about the welfare of animals and the relationship of his creatures, the crown of creation, and how we treat the dominion that he's bequeathed to us, and he's ordered us. There's a whole law, the law against eating a torn limb, that shows us that he really cares about people not inflicting unnecessary pain or fear or cruelty on the animals that we eat. And you see how that plays out with milk and meat, that the Gentiles are not commanded in this respect, but the Jews, who are his priests, his firstborn, his people of priests, his kingdom of priests, are commanded, do not eat together the symbol of a mother's love together with the dead flesh of her calf. And no milk and meat, in other words. And this is there for everybody, to not to govern them, not to command anybody, but to learn from. Similarly, the Sabbath, the seventh day Sabbath, and we've learned over time the value of this. The French Revolution tried to have one day off in every 10, and everything was tens with them. We got kilometers and grams and the metric system from them. So they tried that, and it doesn't work. They tried it. It was a horrible failure. It looks like people really do need that one in every 7 days Sabbath, and then and now people have some intellectual leisure and they're able to think about these things and realize that the Sabbath does not exist in nature. It's a holy, it's from Scripture. We have months are a natural unit of time. Years are a natural unit of time. But where the hell does a week come from? And
It represents 1/4 of a moon cycle. So let me go back to something. Reading your book, or for that matter, reading the Old Testament, if you were going to follow the mandates, it interacts with personal integrity. That is, you follow the 7 Noetic laws, you follow the commandments, it is interlaced with one's own integrity. And as a person who aspires to be a pious Jew, how do you account for our outliers? The Bernie Madoffs, the Jeffrey Epsteins, the Harvey Weinsteins, and others. Do they just stand out because they happen to be Jewish and there are a lot of other evil folks out there? Or is there a paradox operating that we don't know about?
well, I'm glad you didn't mention the Bugsy Siegels. The Bugsy Siegels. We have a huge roster of major mastermind criminals.
Right.
And let alone President Trump's mentor. I mean Roy Cohen and other Senator McCarthy's go-to guy.
Right.
But the Jews are just people. The joke is the Jews are just people, only more so. But we have our own variety of crooks and criminals. Usually, they're a lot more humane and less vicious. I keep getting in trouble over this. I was going on about poor Ghislaine Maxwell getting a raw deal in the Epstein matter. She was accused and sentenced for trafficking, sex trafficking, and I'm looking at this poor girl. I'm seeing her as I'm a longtime defense lawyer. The daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was Jewish, and he had this girl who was not, and she was born to wealth, and then the wealth disappeared when he was murdered. He, by the way, was a vicious World War II fighter who was known in the British special services as murdering German Nazi prisoners. Not in war, but he'd taken prisoners and he just machine gunned them to death. But we produce, like any people, we're a nation, and we produce our fair share of crooks. Usually the crooks are of a more cerebral brand. I mean, they tend to be not crazy violent like mafiosi, but more the kind that will fix the 1919 World Series, or Bernie Madoff, these con men. Savinsky there was a movie about him. That was a great scandal. But
So the Jews were responsible for the Black Sox scandal?
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah, we did. well, I didn't do it. You didn't do it, but well, somebody wants me to come by their house and talk to them and justify the killing in Gaza that's going on. The IDF, the Sahal, the Israeli army, is shooting up Gaza real bad, and this lovely lady kind of puts it on me. How do I justify that? And you don't have anything like that with other people. The Russians, Putin's Russians, do these horrible, horrible things. The people of Myanmar or Burma, are slaughtering people. The Chinese have given all the Uyghurs such hell, and not to mention whatever they've done to the Tibetans. I'm not clear on that. But nobody asked the Chinese or the Russians or the Burmese, the Myanmar people, to justify these sorts of things. But the Jews are held accountable. The Jews are held accountable for the alleged wrong acts of other Jews, which is another thing that kind of makes you wonder, what the hell is going on here? And with all that, what the hell is going on here is one of the big instruments to bring the Jews to Torah and to bring the Jews together as a people who are supposed to do what who are supposed to follow our marching orders to make an exemplary society in the land of Israel, and bring heaven to earth wherever we are. I mean, the big difference between, okay, you got me with, Bernie Madoff and these other.
No. I didn't want to hold you responsible. And that's my point.
No, I don't.
But there's a paradox there you have to look at.
Well, it's the people are people,
right?
Yeah, and they're going to do what people are going to do. But this is part of the phenomenon. I think I told you I was listening to this very hirsute, long-nosed, homely little guy, little rabbi, talking to the Noachites, the pious Gentiles, so-called, in Tennessee, and he's talking about building up the third temple. And I'm listening to this guy, and I could hear my mother's voice in my head, and going, he's going to build the third temple. He can't even pick out a suit, and he's going to do all.
I could just hear your mother say that too.
and he's going on, and I'm thinking, this guy is nuts. He wants to build the third temple. This little guy from New Jersey, probably, and then I realized that the way the system works, it's inevitable that probably some little hirsute, long-nosed, unprepossessing, nerdy guy from New Jersey is going to read the Torah and want to build the third temple. And the fact that that's inevitable, that is part of the program, it's just laid down there. If it's inevitable, that means it's ordained. So, and I realized this guy, it's ordained that this guy should be here talking about doing the third temple. But the thing with all of us is that we have these marching orders that are directed not to take each of us as individuals to heaven, but to help each of us as individuals try to make heaven on earth, to try to make the world a better place. The other religions almost all decree that human history is going to end in cataclysm and disaster. Everybody's going to die except for a chosen few, if that. I was just talking to somebody, a good college-educated guy, an artist, who was telling me that he's thinking he won't have to bother to plan ahead more than 5 years because he expects the rapture to take him up. And this is actually a common attitude among our fellow Americans, among these Gentiles. That, yeah, it's all going to end. And it's going to be really hard on you who are left behind, you poor bastards, you pagans, you you unbelievers, you infidels, that I'll be saved, I'll be in heaven. And this is, this is the obverse of Judaism, where you don't look for personal heaven, but you try to make the world heavenly. And damn, that really is a common factor in the way that, again, I'm not talking about Bernie Madoff, but I don't know about Bernie. I know that he terribly disappointed his wife and kids, and one kid killed himself in shame over what Bernie had done, and the other, poor bastard, and the other died young, and his wife threw up and was tormented. But we try to make heaven on earth. That's part of what the Jews do, and it doesn't always work, and people have different ideas of what's heavenly. But I was interested recently. I was reading a book about spinach empire, and this New Yorker writer was talking about his ancestors. And in Jersey, they had started farming spinach, and they made a fortune. They really did well in the spinach and leafy vegetable business. And they were making money, and they hated the Jews. And why do they hate the Jews? Well, the Jews wanted them to do things like give a fair deal to their workers and not treat their black workers like slaves. And it really got on their nerves. They really didn't like that. And they just decided, so they supported the John Birch Society, and, they supported Ford, let's get rid of these nuisances, because they had their idea of heaven, which was a personal heaven, and the Jews had their idea, which was more in line with the call of Isaiah and the prophets to let righteousness rain down like a mighty stream. They didn't like that. That was contrary to their needs and desires. They didn't want righteousness. They wanted to keep on screwing the people who worked for them. And which is I noted it particularly because it's an interesting phenomenon that you get that so frequently with the very well off, the entitled, who feel that the Jews are there just to ruin the party, to keep them from having their way and getting what they want.
So we represent a thorn in the side of some, and our voices warrant silencing then if we become too much of a nuisance, according to the authorities.
Well, that's the right wing anti-Semites, and then you have the left wing anti-Semites, and then and we're the enemy of humanity because we're capitalists, or we're now the accusation is we're colonialists and imperialists, or we're racists. Whatever is bad is what the Jews are.
Well,
people want to do genocide to the Jews, so the worst thing that they can call us is genocidal.
So, off camera, you shared with me prior to our interview today your effort at setting up a little satellite of the Sierra Club on Woodward Avenue.
Great. A little bit of heaven. Right.
By planting your grove of trees. So this is a delightful story of unthinking bureaucracy. Launch it. What happened? Why did you plant the grove of trees, Michael?
People needed a place to go to the bathroom at the intersection of these two major trunk lines. There's nowhere to go to the bathroom. America in general is bereft of public toilets. I was just in the Far East a couple of months ago. Tokyo, public bathrooms, toilets everywhere. You need to go to the bathroom, you can find a bathroom right
not
away.
Here. Okay, so
not here. No.
So you took it upon yourself to plant how many trees?
a whole lot of trees, and which is not easy. You have to water them. You have to keep them
So,
going. You
so
have to
did you
protect them.
did you plant them yourself?
Yes, some I planted with someone else,
So
but yeah,
what kind of trees did you plant?
well, maples, oaks, blue spruce,
So
a
so
whole
you
bunch of maples.
so you planted what, 2 dozen trees maybe more?
Over time, probably about more than 2 dozen, probably.
And the
So we
trees,
have
the
you
tree,
have like 10.
I can see it now. The trees grew and they provided shade and beauty.
Yes, yes. Well, and there's another up the road in Pleasant Ridge, which is a kind of fancy area, eight in Woodward. 10 this is 8 in Woodward, and this is at 10 in Woodward. Another Jewish guy decided that in the median of Woodward, which is Michigan's main street, it's the old Pioneer Trail, Michigan 1, and he planted white pines. And he planted dozens of white pines and got other people to get into this and watered them. And it's glorious now. It's a symbol of Michigan what he has done, because those little, like my little twigs that grew up, his little white pines, which is a native tree. Michigan was white pines, and he planted all these native trees, and they're just glorious, and they're they're so verdant, and they bring the birds. You get bird song, but this guy was gonna. He saw it was just scrubby grass in a freeway, like a major trunk line median, and he planted all these trees, and he did a lot better than I did.
But just following the logic of the 11th commandment for a moment, and for those who are new to the 11th commandment, it is no act of punishment will go unpunished. Uh, what happened?
Well, it's a cosmic rule,
What
right?
what happened when you attempted to
Oh
defy?
yeah, two friends of mine, actual friends. They're both retired professional men. One a real crackerjack lawyer, and a black guy, my buddy Dwight, and Russell, who's a city planner, uh, very uptight kind of guy. I mean, he his pajamas involve a tie. Yeah, he's that kind of guy, and longtime head of the zoning board, or member of it, and they decided, well, this is horrible. People are going to the bathroom here, because they knew it. They didn't see it, because you can't see it because there were all these bushes. So they urgently called the city. They're part of a neighborhood patrol. They called the city urgently. You got to do something. Take out all these bushes. So the city came with a bunch of roughneck guys and with chainsaws, and some of these bushes were young trees, and I mean, like 5-inch bowls, and so they removed all of the bushes, so that now anybody who wants to go to the bathroom, uh, where these were, will be observed. That everybody and God will see them going to the bathroom, and this makes everything so much better according to their lights. I talked to both of them before, they told me what they had done, and I
So, so,
asked.
so but you understand that this actually adds industry to the legal profession, because some of those
Right,
guys will be arrested for exposing themselves. So there needs to be a prosecution and a defense.
right, yeah, that's not the kind of
Okay.
work we need. Yeah, but they're good people. Everybody needs to go to the bathroom sometimes. There's nowhere to go to the bathroom within at least a quarter mile or so.
So,
So,
so, so
so
I'm curious, if you put the equivalent of 4 J. Johns in your forest, would that
yeah, well,
would that satisfy the needs of the city?
no, one or two, but you don't need that. Just let people go into the bushes, and we've been doing it since the dawn of time, and have a little privacy.
Well,
So we do. We have had people begging at the corner. I mean, there are beggars who come. I think they're all spaced out. They're all high, and they panhandle. Uh,
well,
but
I do a
they
lot
have
of.
to go to the bathroom too.
I will testify that I do a hell of a lot of wilderness hiking, and I've yet to see a flush toilet on the Appalachian Trail.
And I hope you never do. But you, you know, um, I complained to these guys, and the one guy, the planner, was saying, "Well, I'm impressed by your humanity," and but I was bowled over by their lack of humanity. Haven't you ever had to go to the bathroom, buddy? You know, um,
Well, I will not acknowledge it while I'm being recorded, I'm sure.
no, no, of course not. No, um, but immaculate evacuation. I guess is what we're talking about. But the idea of the Jews is that we try to make a more perfect society. That's ingrained in us. It's the basic dynamic of the religion, which is, as I said, a revolutionary religion. And if you look around, the other religions don't have anything like that. They talk about personal redemption. Um, they might treat on the subject, and I've seen pastors who fervently did believe in making the world better than they found it. But it's not ingrained. It's not an inherent dynamic of their religion. It's an add-on. And with us, it's basic. It's ingrained.
Well, those of you who have had the pleasure, as I have, of witnessing Michael today, let me also call to your attention that this is the first time that two Jewish boys were able to launch Riverside without the assistance of our tech support.
Or Gentile helpers. But that's part of the system too. I mean, Israel is part of the nations, and and we're dependent on the nations, and we work with the nations, and we are, you know, a, a goy kadosh. We're goyim ourselves. We are nations. But the nation is supposed to be a holy nation, um, and the holy nation works with all the other nations. We're not the father of the other nations. We're supposedly the oldest, the oldest sibling, and with the longest acquaintance with the Creator, and more of a friendship with the Creator. But we work with them, and we expect them to come calling and to join us, and
Well,
that's part of the system.
I would not be functioning well without my Christian and Muslim brothers. Uh, I happen to be gifted in two things, occasionally writing and multiple choice exams, and not too bad at Scrabble, chess, and crossword puzzles. But for me to change a ball cap valve on a toilet usually requires 6 round trips to the local Home Depot. So I, I get by with a little help from my friends, and it sounds like you do too.
Well, yeah, I can handle the plumbing, but there's other things. And well, I mean, we're all Blanche Dubois, uh, in Streetcar Named Desire. We all depend on the kindness of strangers, you know. But that's a decent society. That's the way society is supposed to work, where the strangers do come to your aid, um, and
So for our
and
next
don't.
presentation, you're going to tell me about Tennessee Williams' Hebrew heritage for sure.
Who knew? Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Well,
So good luck on your medical adventures, and I will
oh,
see. I will see you next week, my friend. Thank you.
I look forward. I look forward. So
Goodbye,
long.
cousin.